Hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the prospect of working from home indefinitely of podcasts that helps the average Aussie try and make sense of their current political environment. I'm Greg. Does my family really have to get breakfast all at the same time, Savage?
And I'm Jake. What frickin' day is it, Far Wharton? On today's episode, we talk social servicing. Whoops, that sounds a bit lube, my bad. And we discuss listener commenting about social communicating.
I think, Jake, your comment about my bad sort of sums it up. It's almost a modern version at the moment of, being forgiven for your sins, really, isn't it? You can sort of mess up as much as you like, and then you can just sort of say, well, my bad, and apparently it's all good.
Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. So the essentially what happened was on Monday morning, the MyGov website completely crashed. And as you said, Greg, there was an early claim by the government services minister Stuart Robert that essentially this had occurred as part of a cybersecurity exercise from unknown parties, a distributed denial of service or DDoS attack. And the thing is, he completely talked out of turn. He had not consulted with any of the cybersecurity experts. He probably spoke to somebody in his department who said, I've got a quick answer, and gave that answer to the press club. But the thing, essentially, the reason why it crashed was a lack of preparation. There should certainly have been some amount of economic modelling suggesting that the overwhelming government shutdowns were going to cause massive influx of people. And sorry, I should say also that coupled with the stimulus measures that enabled people who have been affected by the economic downturn by way of their employment, that they should go to Centrelink office or the MyGov website to register, there seems to be a lack of planning, that there was going to be a huge influx of people. So the website was set up to receive about 50,000 people at one time on the website, and it received around at the early peak when it first died. There was over 100,000 people on the website. So essentially, they just did not have the infrastructure, which could have been easily spun up, but had not been. So it's very unfortunate, and it was really just a bit unfortunate. Unfortunate is underselling it. That the government services minister Stuart Robert came out and claimed that it was something else, and then had to backtrack when it seemed actually that it was his bad on two accounts. A, he hadn't planned, and B, he either lied or hadn't appropriately spoken to the right people before giving a response on why the government website crashed.
Yeah, and I know that Fran Kelly on the Party Room this week, she mentioned that, at the very least, I mean, Qantas had laid off 20,000 employees or something like that. Yep. So, at the very least, there was 20,000 just coming from Qantas. So anyway, a few arguments back and forth. I guess my take on this is really that, why not apologize? Like, why not come out and be really, really compassionate? Like, why block at that particular time? And you mentioned in the intro that we were going to be talking about, a comment from someone on our Facebook page, and Fred Stokes has written in, and it was into his 9th day of quarantine. So, the response was lengthy about his feelings about Scott Morrison and his hypocrisy and all that sort of thing. Talk us through some of those comments, and because I think it's actually a sentiment that really resonates with a lot of people, and it really feeds into this idea of empathy that wasn't coming through probably up until Friday's press conference with Scott Morrison.
So Scott Morrison had previously been extremely critical of the Labor government's response to the 2008 global financial crisis. Now, there has been a massive economic downturn. There has been for about a year. the Reserve Bank of Australia has been crying out to the Morrison government and the Morrison government ministers saying, we need stimulus now. Bring forward as many of the infrastructure projects that you've got in your pipeline. Bring them forward. Do them now. We need to stimulate the economy. We need to hire more people. We need to get people moving. We need a more productive economy. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves in a recession. And then along came the bushfires. As unfortunate and tumultuous as the bushfires were, you would have thought that there would have been a bit of economic stimulation as a consequence of the bushfires. Specifically things like houses were destroyed, townships were, laid apart. There were roads that were destroyed. All of these things that were destroyed, we have to fix. So you would have thought there would have been hiring of labourers, etc. But unfortunately, the cash didn't mobilise quickly enough, so that hasn't been able to sort itself out. And then we had COVID-19 and the massive, massive shutdown of industries across Australia. And again, the government has had to react, but has it reacted quickly enough? Has it reacted adequately? The major thing with the stimulus is, the government has to react, and the government has to provide stimulus that is going to do, what it is intended to do, which is, stimulate the economy. It is going to have to put money into the pockets of individuals so that they can survive during this, massive shutdown, massive quarantine period. So there is really no other choice but to put money in the pockets of individuals, in the pockets of businesses, etc. And as much as it is, probably technically a bit of an occasion of hypocrisy in that, yes, Scott Morrison and his ministers did absolutely lambast the Labor government for the for acting the way that they did during the stimulus. But during that time, everybody wanted Australia to succeed, and during this time, everybody wants Australia to succeed. The last thing that we want is for for us to fail as a nation just in order to make Scott Morrison look bad because of his, perceived hypocrisy. What we absolutely want is for both Australia to succeed in terms of being able to get through this just overwhelming crisis of, epic economic proportions and health-related proportions, and come out the other side a strong enough nation to pick up essentially where we left off rather than having to reforge old ground. We want him to succeed, as much as it may be some perceived hypocrisy in that he is doing stimulus in much the same way that the Labor government did stimulus. We want him to succeed.
Now, they've just announced in Australia, it says that the wage subsidy is on the way. This literally came through just now. It says a UK-style, this is in the Sydney Morning Herald, a UK-style wage subsidy on the way in Morrison's plan to pay workers who lose jobs. It says Australians who lose their jobs will be given a wage subsidy to guarantee a share of their income as the coronavirus crisis wipes out hundreds of thousands of jobs in a government plan to be announced within days. The Morrison government is planning to pay workers as much as 80% of their wages and is examining ways to get employers to transfer the money to their staff as an alternative to using the welfare system, because that's been one of their biggest criticisms, has been this handling of the Centrelink situation. Now, the Morrison government is saying that they have to rely on an already established system. So rather than everyone signing up and getting money straight into their accounts, which would take forever, we used an already established system. And apparently their argument is that during the global financial crisis, that was the model that worked. Yeah. The model that worked was the one when you used an already established system. Now that kind of makes sense. What doesn't make sense is and I've seen some comments online as well, and I'm sure there's good arguments for it, but most people already have a way of getting money directly into their account through the Australian Tax Office, especially a lot of these workers would have online accounts for tax and, all that sort of thing. So, I mean, I can get tax back pretty quickly, like within the few days. So I can see that argument as well. I can sort of see both sides of the coin there. But the other one was, why aren't they just subsidizing workers? And now they've said that they're going to do that. So we've got 80% of their wages will be paid, it seems like, to their employer, and then their employer will pay the employees, which seems like a pretty nifty little solution.
I think the reason that is going to work best, and I'll maybe need to explain myself afterwards as well. But the reason I think that is a really powerful way to do it is, twofold. Number one, those employees will remain on the books. So essentially they're not being fired.
Yeah, and that's the catch, isn't it? I mean, that's what they're saying. They're basically saying, look, you're going to get this money, but you have to keep people employed.
Exactly. And so the other point that I was going to make is that in order for a company to pay its employees, they have to employ somebody to pay those employees. So it is not only keeping those workers who are affected by the downturn on the payroll. It's also ensuring that a person maintains their employment in order to pay all of those employees. So it is. I think that is quite a smart way to do it. The way that it was done the way that the Rudd government did it during the GFC reaction stimulus is they gave checks out to everyone. And that was heavily criticised because people who had recently died also received checks, which sounds great, but unfortunately they were unable to cash it, and it led to all sorts of issues down the track. So I think this is, frankly, quite a smart way of doing it.
It certainly seems smart, doesn't it? I'm sure that there'll be criticisms all around, but I mean, Anthony Albanese has been pretty supportive of a lot of the measures here, which they sort of have to be. They've ended up in a right mess over in the US when there wasn't sort of bipartisan support, whereas here we seem to have a lot of bipartisan support. Anthony seems to be sort of saying after the fact, look, it would be good if we looked after casual workers more or whatever it is, but he seems to be very supportive of what's happening, which means that things are going through quickly. I think that was the other argument too with the wages, was that it was so. I don't think they're getting them until. This is the Centrelink.
Well, they're not getting the support payments until the 1st of April, or is it the end of April? Sorry, April 30.
Late April. Yeah, late April. So, and it's the same with the other 750 for those who are on benefits already. So,
if they can mobilise that quicker, it's going to be more impactful, I think, to the individuals on the ground. I think the other side of this, and I may have touched on it, but the other side of this is it means that those companies could potentially stay in business until the time when these shutdown measures are able to end and are able to begin trading again. This is the one thing that the government really, it seems, has their eye on, which is how are we going to pick ourselves back up to a level of productivity that is going to re-stimulate the economy once once it's all done.
Yeah, look, it's such a. I mean, I'm glad I'm not in charge, right? Let me put that out there. I mean, look, it's one thing making sure all the leads are plugged in to run this podcast. I'm sure it's a very another thing to try and see the world through this terrible economic situation. I don't. The criticisms are, for the most part, I see are just. And coming back to Fred and what Fred Stokes wrote on our Facebook page, just about that confusion and about why can't you just give these people the money? Why do they have to line up around the block? Like, why are we seeing in Australia this footage of thousands and thousands of people lining up at Centrelink for unemployment benefits? I mean, 2 weeks ago, this was crazy talk, and now it's just a nightly feast of these terrible images. Why is that happening in Australia? I think that's the question that people are asking. It's certainly me asking it with my wife at nighttime, going, this is just insane. Like, seeing these things and why is this happening here? Why can't they just put the money in their account? Now, like I said, I'm not I'm glad I'm not the one running the economy at the moment. But the people who are seem to have a pretty straight line towards fixing things up and trying to do that in the best way possible, whether or not that's through our own economic measures, whether or not that's looking at what other countries have done and going, hey, you know what, that's a pretty nifty idea. Let's give that a crack.
Yep.
And sort of trying to put together the best model for us. But it's just, if the news wasn't heartbreaking enough with people dying and with people being sick, it's now significantly more heartbreaking.
Yep.
Watching these images, which is going to elicit this visceral response. And I think most people want to give the government the benefit of the doubt, but they're really seeing through a few of those cracks.
Yeah, well, I think the one. I mean, I don't know that all people want to see the government succeed, but I mean, certainly all people want to see the Australian people come out the other side of this strong enough to react proactively or react actively, I suppose, once we do come out the other side. And in order to do that, we do as a nation need to succeed. One thing I did want to talk about with the messaging is just the messaging around health advice and social distancing, and certainly all of the communication coming out of the Prime Minister's office and the Chief Health Officer's office, etc. But I did also want to say, just on the economic measures, or specifically on the people queuing for Centrelink. It's harrowing. It is just so. It is so painful to see so many people out of work. The Australian economy sits at around 5 to 6% unemployment at any time, and that's bad enough, because that does mean that there are several hundred thousand people across Australia that are unable to find work. That's so harrowing to see. It is just it's shocking. I feel great empathy for all of those individuals who have been either laid off or told that they don't have a job until the economy and the shutdown is discontinued. So, yeah, our heart goes out to every one of those people. I did want to talk a little bit about, so Fred Stokes did make that other comment around the messaging, and you sort of touched on that on the sort of the stimulus measures. The other side of that is those health measures, and I feel that there has been a great lack of consistent communication going out to the Australian people by way of both the Prime Minister and those people that are, and even the premiers as well. It has been a time, I think, of great confusion. The area where I think we've had the most confusion is around schools staying open. That has been really confusing when people say, essentially, you cannot go outside, you cannot congregate 1.5 meter, any less than 1.5 meters away from anybody, and yet. Then you see, teachers and others, parents especially, commenting that, hey, my child is going to be sitting, within 1.5 meters of several other people at their school. And then they're going to bring anything that they caught during that close proximity to people during their school. They're going to bring that home to me, and then I'm going to go to work, or I'm going to go to the shops, and I'm going to pass it on to the next person. So that confusing messaging around schools, I feel, was really quite detrimental to consistent messaging around social distancing. And there have been a number of those cases, things like hairdressing being referred to as an essential service. Don't get me wrong, my hair is very important to me, and I feel that there are probably hundreds of thousands of hairdressers around the country that breathed a sigh of relief around that change to hairdressing being declared essentially a non-essential service one day, where hairdressing is fine to be open, but you can only spend 30 minutes within the hairdresser, to the very next day that being completely changed around, and hairdressing, you can stay as long as you like in there.
Well, I think that's kind of the point, though. I think that, they talk about the sort of two layers to the whole thing, which we've touched on already, right? Which is the economic side of things. And then you've got the health side of things. Now, when we think of the health side of things, we often think of, not going outside, not, like making sure you don't shake hands, wash your hands, blah, 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 blah. We've all got those messages. But the other side of it, to the health thing, the other sort of quadrant, I'm sure there's more than four, but anyway, I'm going with quadrant. The other quadrant to the health puzzle is the mental health side of things. Now, my view is that that's why hairdressers are considered an essential service for the mental health side of things. You feel great when you get a new haircut, and you feel dreadful when you realize that your hair looks like a Chewbacca, right? So I think that hairdressers are considered essential for that mental health component, which is great, because you can't. I think the fact that someone actually considered that, I think, is really, really important. Nails. I mean, look, you can get away with your nails not being done for a while, right? You can get away
Speak
with
for yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure we just lost a whole raft of our listeners, but you can get away with that. But hair is really important. Hair is important for your self-esteem. Hair is important for your job. Hair is important for the way that people interact with you, and those three things are really, really important at the moment. Your mental health, your job, and the way you interact with people are really, really important right now. So I can totally see why hairdressers are considered an essential service. Same with, bottle shops. Yes, we'd actually do our whole country an enormous favor if we shut bottle shops. No one is smarter from drinking alcohol. No one is more healthy from drinking alcohol, right? So we would be doing our whole country a huge favor from shutting bottle shops. But we don't talk about that. We're all very grateful that bottle shops are open at the moment for our mental health. If you suddenly shut off bottle shops from being able to serve alcohol, you will just destroy Australia's a vast majority of Australia's, identity. Like, I'm not saying that it's a good thing.
Think of the divorce rate.
It is the way that it is. Look, kind of true, right? You jest, but it's kind of true. I mean, it would put people on edge. It would be like, I can't even have a drink on Friday night. I can't do this. I can't do that. But nope, you can still get a haircut. You can still have a drink. You can still go for walks. You can still do these things. You just can't do a whole bunch of other stuff, which is considered non-essential. On the school thing, look, that I can totally get why parents, and as a parent myself, have found that confusing. The only advice I've really got for parents around that is just to stay on top of what's happening in your particular state, because now we've got states breaking away from each other, breaking away from the message. To his credit, this is not Scott Morrison's fault. He has been very, very consistent with his message that schools should stay open based on the best medical advice that he has been given. Schools should stay open and kids should be going to schools. It's the states that have broken away from that. It's the states that have made their individual decisions, and that's not for me to comment. But if you're a parent, stay on top of what's happening in your particular state. And try, if that makes you angry, then try and figure out why they're doing what they're doing. Because, at the end of the day, you do a little bit of research and it sort of feels like, okay, that maybe was a pretty good decision. But Scott's been very, very consistent with his message. It's the states that have broken away from that particular message. I don't see that as a federal fault.
No, I do mostly agree with you. And I think the issue has been that the reason why schools are to remain open has not been adequately communicated to the Australian public. Based on the best advice, it's really for two reasons, but you sort of have to parcel through a number of different press conferences in order to get that reason. Reason number one is it'll take, I believe it's something to the order of 30% of the medical workforce. They will need to remain home in order to take care of the children. And the other reason is that just back to the first reason, it's suggesting that if those kids were at home, they would be either unsupervised or have to be looked after by potentially grandparents who would then come into contact with the medical workforce
absolutely.
as they came home and pass on the thing. So it's passing it on to a vulnerable population. Sorry. The second reason is that with coronavirus, it does not seem to affect children in the same way that it does adults.
No.
In that, one of the greatest ways for this coronavirus to spread is through coughing. And if the kids aren't coughing, then they're not having the opportunity to pass on the virus. There's still obviously, if they have the virus and they are in that infectious period, they've still got the ability to pass it on to people through touch and mucus and other droplet areas, but they don't seem to be the so-called super spreaders that is experienced when, during influenza. Influenza is much different. It's a much different virus. It presents in a different way. And kids are in many ways known as the super spreaders, but it's different in this particular virus. So the reason why I feel like we've been a little bit let down in terms of both consistency in messaging and potentially also just the oversaturation of information is that, if you want to understand why schools are remaining open, you kind of have to as you said, you kind of have to read into it. You kind of have to look up that information. And on the other hand, you've got tens upon tens of thousands of people on various social media platforms saying, why are the schools staying open? They're just going to spread the thing. And then everybody else on that social media platform saying, oh, yeah, well, you're totally right. You can be the Lone Ranger in there and say, hey, no, it's actually a really good idea. But invariably, we're getting often better information or more consistent advice from social media than we are from our national leaders on that specific item. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, look, it is unfortunate because, that's the whole thing, right? Is that, as a few of my favorite commentators will say, facts don't care about your feelings. And I totally get that it feels right to close schools. Like, it feels like a really common sense, normal thing to do. Like if the WHO chief announced that there was a pandemic and then Australia went, yep, the schools are closed, everyone would go, well, that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make intuitive sense to keep schools open. So yes, you do have to dig and you do have to find out what they're saying about that, and realize that they're not in this room, with their fingers pressed together like evildoers going, how are we going to kill everyone? They're really trying to figure out this thing as best as they can. Scott Morrison has kids in New South Wales, in the epicenter of Australia's coronavirus outbreak. He has kids here. He doesn't want them to die. He's not sitting there going, well, let's make these terrible decisions so that my kids will face death, or that, him himself would face death if they were carriers. He's going by the best medical advice, and it's counterintuitive to him. You can see that, but that doesn't matter because
you're exactly right.
Yeah, it shouldn't matter. Now, I do think the idea that schools open to essential workers, that is such a great thing, because that means that if you have a job, because everyone who has a job is an essential worker, if you have a job, you can go to that job. You can drop your kids, this is New South Wales, you can drop your kids at school and you can go to your job. If you can keep them home, keep them home.
Yep.
It's a pretty, to me, that seems like a pretty decent way of doing it.
I agree on the premise of essential worker. That added to confusion as well, because in an organisation's business continuity plan, which most organisations will at the top level have a BCP or business continuity plan, it will say, it will classify who or what types of workers are the essential workers that must remain on site in the event of enacting the BCP. And confusingly, so that the language is essential workers stay at work, right? So they continue to go to the workplace in order to. But then when the Prime Minister said that everybody who has a job is an essential worker, that then contradicted the message of, many workplaces around all of Australia who say anybody who is an, quote, an essential worker must turn up to work, but had previously said, hey, if you can work from home, work from home. So you're getting two different, you're getting essentially a contradicting message just because of the use of a particular term, which is essential worker. So
yeah, I can get that. I suppose that boils down to a semantic thing,
it absolutely
which is very much important, and I totally get that that's very much important, and it's certainly not an argument that I had thought of. I mean, when we're told that an essential worker is someone who has a job, I went, okay, that makes sense,
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose the difference would be. I suppose, again, semantically, the difference between an essential worker and an essential service, might be something to unpack another time. But yeah, that's not something I'd thought about either. Anyway,
but I suppose one final point that I would like to make is that it seems that the messaging that we've gotten from our federal leaders and our state leaders, while sometimes confusing and while probably in terms of Fred Stokes's comment, may be in fact a little bit hypocritical or a lot hypocritical, depending on sort of how you perceive it. The fact is that and this is sort of breaking news as we are recording the show, the information coming out of the ABC at the moment is that the Prime Minister has said that the rate of increase in coronavirus cases has fallen in Australia over the past week from previously 25 to 30% per day to 13 to 15% per day. So essentially the social distancing measures, the overwhelming shutdown of industries and the economy across Australia has had the impact that was intended, which is that the so-called curve is flattening.
Which would, it's obviously very early to tell, but that is such fantastic news. I mean, when you're looking at Italy and you're looking at the sheer numbers that you just can't wrap your head around of deaths of actual infections, and then you look at our ones and it's like, 14 people have died at the moment, and it's like, man, we are lucky that we've got those smaller numbers, and it is tragic and it's heartbreaking that these things are happening. But to be looking at the number 14 compared to an average of like 850, 900 a day in Italy, we've got to be doing something right, and we've got to congratulate ourselves for that. Because one of my favorite little memes from this whole situation has been, the virus doesn't spread, you spread it. Right?
Yes.
You spread it. So
just like Vegemite.
That's right. You spread it like Vegemite. Not that we are comparing Vegemite to a virus. I mean, if Kraft or whoever owns Vegemite wants to sue us, I'm totally happy with that for the publicity. But keep our producer Johnny active for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that it's a testament to us doing the right thing. The news are not going to go around photographing people doing the right thing. They're going to go around photographing people doing the wrong thing, and as they should. And those people should be shamed and named and humiliated and all sorts of things, because that's a terrible thing. But we do need to stand back and congratulate ourselves. We do need to stand back and realize how gosh darn awesome our health system is, and all these things. What this virus has done across the world has highlighted any weakness that you have in your systems. It's highlighted any weakness that you've got. If you are not a great communicator, it's highlighted that. If you don't have a great healthcare system, it's highlighted that. If you have gaps in your rich people and your poor people, it's highlighted that. If you have overpopulation, it's highlighted that. If you don't have great sanitary measures in your country before this whole situation, it's highlighted that. So any weakness, it's been highlighted. The fact that only such a few weaknesses have been highlighted in our system, I think is a real testament to us as a people and as a country as well. Now, it's not over yet, and I'm sure by the time this goes to air in a few hours,
things will have changed.
Yeah, we'll all be we'll be getting different messages.
You are right. You are right, though, Greg, and you are absolutely right to be very optimistic about this. I mean, ultimately, and maybe as sort of a final statement, I think. As long as the vaccine that is sort of impending in the next few months or next several months, as long as that vaccine doesn't turn the vaccinated into zombies, and we end up in a proper post-apocalyptic scenario. As long as that doesn't happen, we will make it through the other side. A stronger and better nation able to cope with pandemics in the future. So that is some small bit of happiness that we can sort of or hope that we can sort of inject into this scenario. That we will get through this. We will absolutely get through this, and we will come through stronger and more prepared than we ever have been for what will inevitably pop up in the future again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. There'll be so many lessons to learn from this, and we've already learnt a lot of lessons. I mean, I've learnt a lot of lessons. Not to make it about me, but it is still just, it's so grounding. Like it's such a grounding experience to do without all this stuff that I took for granted, and to enjoy what I've got in my house, and to enjoy time with the kids, and to try and create a home gym, and to just go for walks around my local area, and all these sorts of things. There's like little pockets of what we need to survive cropping up, and it might not be what we thought it was. It's such a grounding thing. We're all thinking about the same thing. We're all talking about the same thing. Connections are still being encouraged via social media. We've got so much money being chucked into mental health plans, and making sure that people are okay, and there are some silver linings here, as bad as the news is, and as bad as I hate waking up at the moment, because it's just like, okay, I've got to brace myself, I got to make sure I got a really good breakfast, and a good cup of coffee and stuff to get me through it, because it's a weight that we're all carrying around with us throughout the whole day. But man, there's some positive stuff, there really is some positive stuff. And what will end up being kept after all this? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how quickly we stop taking things for granted again. Let's start taking things for granted again. Going to the park and playing Frisbee with your 11 friends. I don't know how quickly we start taking that for granted again. But I do know that now, as much as there's people who are suffering, and I don't want to take away from people's great losses here, but it doesn't do us any favors to dwell on that for too long either, because we just end up as a depressed nation. Then we do need to sort of get these flitters of hope, and I think that they're there. And the fact that we're even mentioning flattening the curve when Italy probably hasn't even begun to get to their apex yet, if it is an apex of a curve, I don't know. That's I don't know. It's hard when it's a hard thing to say, hey, I think we're doing a decent job here. However, there's still some little pockets that we need to fix up. But yeah, look, if people are confused, they're confused,
right?
Improvement.
Always room for improvement. There's always room for improvement also. But I think on the whole, when you look at our response compared to others, it is staggeringly positive. There is that niggling thing of, hey, should we have been responding to the economic downturn in Australia sooner? And should have we been, enacting, stimulus measures, particularly around bringing forward infrastructure projects on a national scale sooner? But invariably we didn't. We're acting now. The federal government is acting now, and it is hopefully going to be enough to get those who really are suffering right now due to the shutdowns through this tumultuous period, and hopefully sustain the nation so that we can be prepared in whenever it is, 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 1 month's time, whatever it is, that we are prepared to essentially re-engage as an entire economy as soon as the sanctions are lifted.
I agree.
That's good.
Well, that went somewhere, didn't it?
It did definitely go somewhere. We missed out on the sports brought stuff. And are you happy to not do that one?
Yeah, I'm totally happy, man. That was special. That was great.
And did you want to talk about do you want to do the explainer?
I don't know, man. What do you want to do? Do you want to?
Well, why don't we wrap
could just
this
say
up
that,
as an episode?
You could just say that today, Gregg and Jake just debrief about what's going on.
Stuff.
I mean, yeah.
We could also record a second, like a short episode, if you like, on the explainer.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we can do that. Let's wrap.
Do you want to do that today, or do you want to do that during the week?
Yeah. Oh, we can do it now if you like, or otherwise we can wait until later on in the week because there might be other stuff.
Yeah,
do
let's
a second
wait.
show later on in the week.
Let's wait. The kids have gone out with their dad. He's come up here and he's taken them for a drive. So this is sort of time that Rachel and I haven't had for a long time because Grandma was out a little while ago. So I might try and sneak in another episode this week if that's all right.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Maybe lock the doors and turn the lights down low.
Yep. I think it's just time to just sit and chat and debrief. Like we just, you know, because you got to be strong for the kids, but to sort of admit, to
be vulnerable.
Yeah. That's right. All right. Well, I'm going to hit stop. Yeah.
What about the outro?
Yep. Let's do the outro.
Do you want to record the outro later?
No, we'll do it now.
Okay.
Do it now. Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you for offering me a couch to lie on today and to lean back and just debrief about, thoughts that have been building up during the week. It's a very nice leather couch, and I'm glad you've stayed at least 1.5 meters away from me while I'm on this couch.
The couch within the pouch, I love it.
Yeah, we certainly turned the pouch into the couch today, didn't we?
We did indeed. And what we asked the listeners to do is, if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on your podcaster of choice. It definitely assists us with visibility on the various podcast medias, and of course subscribe. And you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook by searching for The Pouch, the podcast.
Yes, and speaking of The Pouch, the podcast, you can head to thepouchthepodcast.com, direct your friends there, direct anyone you want there. Everyone's on social media at the moment, so that way they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice and jump on The Pouch, the bandwagon. Jake, thank you so much for talking to me this week.
Thank you, Greg.
It's warmed the cockles.
Well, I'm glad that your cockles are warm, frankly.
Usually it takes a particularly well-knitted cockle warmer.
Yes. Yes.
But merely talking to you today has saved someone that hassle.
Well, I'm very glad that you've not had occasion to use your cockle warmer today, and that in fact a conversation has warmed said cockles. I feel like this is probably the most times that somebody has said cockles in a podcast ever. Yeah.
I'm just going to say ever.
Yeah, I agree. I agree entirely. But thanks, Greg, and thank you, listeners. Greatly appreciate it.